Greetings, fellow Empyreans. I am Ashtarothi, and this is my reading of the Chronicle of Sine Wave Omega. Sine Wave Omega was originally released in 2018. It is the second of a two-part series of Sine Wave Alpha and Sine Wave Omega. Sine Wave Alpha is already available on this channel. Links down below or in the card. But before I begin, I would like to thank my patrons and all of my supporters who check out my Twitch and my YouTube. You guys are really awesome. Let me do thank you all. Without further ado, let us begin Sine Wave Omega. Greetings, fellow Empyreans. I am Ashtarothi, the voice of New Eden, and today we continue with Sine Wave Omega. Some personal recollections. Paytor System, Matar, Great Caravanserai, Council's Quarter, YC 118-09-06. I have never been fond of the Great Caravanserai. For a center of politics and considerable intrigue, it's far too open and busy. Not to mention that the ventilation in the council quarters is atrocious, far too hot in the summer and shockingly cold in the winter, a consequence of bad adaptation. The old architecture, built to take account of the climate, is fine, but rather, too much clutter has been added inside. Of course, the outside can't be changed for heritage reasons. Fortunately, I don't find myself visiting the heart of Minmatar politics that often these days. Unfortunately, I had to make a visit to see old Shakor in connection to the upcoming diplomatic visit to Amar Prime. I wouldn't have bothered with insinuating myself into the affair, but it afforded me an opportunity to deal with several matters that had been previously delayed, or, in one case, were quite urgent. Unsurprisingly, Kyton Yun awaited me in the anteroom of the Sanmatar's office. I'd known Kyton for a long time, what with the Elder Fleet matter and a certain other aspect of Thucker tribe operations in conjunction with the rest of the Minmatar. I'd always found him pleasant enough company, but he'd become quite dangerous in some respects. A shrewd man, but intense and driven. The events of the Elder Fleet conflict and subsequent border war had altered him somewhat. Shakor valued him as a personal envoy, willing to get things done without scruple, so long as Matari interests were advanced. "My dear Yun, it's so good to see you again," I smiled. "Sakuni, welcome back." Kyton Yun had a guarded air as he greeted me. Something up then. I steeled myself to deal with Shakor as Yun led me through. Old White Eyes was standing at the window. Presumably this was to take in a little air, even if it was quite ionized after passing through the shimmer field guarding the opening. Yun led me to the chairs set in front of the Sanmatar's desk and waited. Shakor stayed at the window for a moment more. In anyone else, I'd consider this affection, but Malakus Shakor didn't go in for that kind of thing. He was making sure he'd mastered himself. Something was most certainly up. "Please sit," Shakor said, as he turned and walked behind the desk to take his seat. His personal mapping sensors, no doubt connected up through his own capsular implants, meant that psychologically blind as he may be, he could perfectly well see everything around him. Augmented as he was, Shakor could probably visualize his surroundings in real time in a number of different ways. Those that didn't appreciate this were at a severe disadvantage when dealing with the de facto leader of the Minmatar Republic. Happily, I was acutely aware of his capabilities. I settled myself and waited for Shakor to start the meeting. Instead, Kyton Yun opened the proceedings, which was interesting. "Malatu, we've had word from Mukasa." Malatu, in front of me. The meeting had suddenly become very interesting indeed. "How is Silberar?" "Optimistic. He reports that his infiltration units have surveyed the main impound populations and sampled for suitability. There's a high percentage. Normal distribution." Silbura Mukasa, Shakor's man in the Justice Department, the Republic's slave liberators and slave hunters. I knew what this was about and decided to interject. "I could have told you that the Amar hadn't taken steps to prevent the possibility of their slaves being entered into Alpha State programs. For one thing, it's not practical. They'll have to rely on the usual methods, Vitoxin and the rest of it." Shakor tilted his head to one side as he turned to regard me with his white, blind eyes. "That as may be, Sakuni, but I make sure of my facts before I act on them." "Act on them? You shouldn't be so hasty, Sanmatar. These Minmatar and their obsessions. My sources tell me that AG-12 are closing in on Amarr as it is. If you start something with the slave populations, this will blow up, and we're not quite ready. Sakuni, you sit in my office as someone who has given this technology to the Amarr and the Caldari. I'm not sure you should expect to dictate policy to us in this matter. This again. Samotar, you know the terms of the SOE's program. They were always going to give the fruits of Project Ascension to all parties. Did that require you to act as facilitator in that sharing? Well, now, that allowed me to give the tribes a certain head start, didn't it? Look, the program is irrevocable for all intents and purposes, but CONCORD could still cause us trouble if it comes out before the coronation. Directive Alpha Gamma 12 could be invoked to freeze deployment of the technology if all empires are not ready. Not to mention the Society of Conscious Thought have enough cards given their own SEC license for transneural injection tech. Their hand will be stronger than the Inner Council without the Empress on the throne. Shakor turned to Yun with an expectant expression. The envoy cleared his throat. That seems a fine distinction to make, Sakuni. I'd allow you that before the trials, but Katis is Empress, crowned or not. Yun held up his hand as I made it to reply. However, you're right about AG-12 and the Society won't like all of this. The SOE's involvement will infuriate them. Using their tech for unlicensed research and development of new cloning will probably make Reich's head explode. Yun paused and chuckled. Well, maybe he'll raise his voice. Anyway, Malatu, our friend here has a point. We should be careful, especially with the Galente situation. They're exposed? The Syndicate smugglers only delivered the key components and specifications a week ago. This sounded bad. My misgivings about the Amarr and Galente seemed to be coming true more quickly than I had expected. Only a week? You really did give us a head start, rumbled Shakor. Yes, and my contacts in Cartham only received their little package a day before that. Until now, there has been nothing for AG-12 to really grab a hold of outside of those RSS facilities that you managed to negotiate space for the trust partners. Shakor grunted, and her obol saw sense for a change. Didn't hurt to have the threat of the Vo Lakat making a leadership play hanging over his head. Sakuni smiled. He's a proud man. Yes, he is, frowned Shakor, with some justification. What about the Caldari? They'll get their shipment this week. The CEP itself insisted on separate deliveries to each megacorp. Made it much trickier. Exposing one megacorp could give AG-12 ammunition for the injunction. However, I doubt the recruitment screening programs have piqued their interest, and even the building of new clone bank production networks has probably only been a concern to DED conflict monitoring. They'd assume it could be a prelude to anticipated losses in a war situation. But I'm not worried about the Caldari. Back to the Galente. What's all this, Yun? Shakor's envoy inclined his head. They were a bit too eager, and a bit too careless with their vetting, it seems. An AG-12 operative was on the ground inside one of their blank conditioning centers when it received its final components. This news vexed me. Even if it was typical of the Galente, who think their intelligence services are splendid even though the great majority of their operatives are bunglers and clowns. When was this? Yesterday morning, Kali local time. Kali local? You mean they had a facility on Galente Prime? I was somewhat taken aback and shook my head. And how did you find out about this so quickly? Yun smiled. As I said, their vetting was laxed. We had our own operative in place. There was, well, yes, an accident. And there's no immediate urgency. Relieved, I sat back and looked at Yun and Shakor. Ruthless men in pursuit of interests of their people. Not something to forget. Not something I'd likely to forget given certain events they've orchestrated. Even so, I mused. This probably means the Galente operation will crack open soon. All the more urgent that a common understanding is arrived at amongst the great powers outside of the oversight of CONCORD. This is a technology that they would do their utmost to suppress. Shakor grinned and turned his opaque gaze on me again. They can try. There will be an opportunity to reach an agreement, if not an accord, at the coronation festivities. There will be an opportunity to reach an agreement, if not an accord, at the coronation festivities. Yun smiled. Your place in the delegation as a representative of the Vo Lakat remains available to you, even if it does seem to us that you're representing interests beyond those of the Thucker caravan. One might say that you represent interests beyond even those of the 7 tribes. Amusing as I found the insinuations, I could recognize a gambit meant to shock some denial or indiscretion from me. Here the truth will serve, even if it was a small truth embedded in a web of lies. You mean the sisters? Oh, well, I'm afraid it's true. The Volakat has a partnership with them, and they can't be seen to represent themselves. Too many people watch them too closely. So yes, I represent their interests, and those of the compact that lies behind Project Ascension. It can't be any other way, as much as you don't like it, Sanmatar. I turned to meet Shakur's sightless gaze. Shakur smiled thinly. Very well, Sakuni. We'll do it this way. Be ready. I smiled back. Oh, I will be, Sanmatar. I will be. Southern Vesador, Satchas City, MIO Field Office, YC118-0929. Sub-Inquisitor Ramal Zoshan walked into Satchas City's Ministry of Internal Order field office with a slight limp and made his way to the investigative branch's floor. Passing through the bullpen, he noticed a man bedecked in sumptuous and ornate priestly robes talking animatedly to an interviewing officer. The older man in robes, presumably a cleric of high rank, perhaps an archdeacon, was accompanied by a woman clad in advanced but well-worn combat armor. Zoshan paused a moment and scrutinized the two. Their attire bore a sigil of some kind that he vaguely recognized, though it was not a familiar piece of religious iconography. Zoshan looked over at the chief investigator's office, and saw that Inquisitor Sarkovas was already busy with someone. The Sub-Inquisitor decided to take a seat close by the unusual pair while he waited. The priest was describing the circumstances of some kind of attack to the interviewing officer. Santka here saved me. You know, if it hadn't been for her quick wits, those assassins would have succeeded, which would have been very inconvenient. The cleric waved a hand indulgently at his armored companion, apparently some kind of bodyguard. She smiled faintly and nodded as the man went on. I must say, I'm dismayed that such an event could take place during the Holy Coronation Week. There are some who would try to stop me in my mission and dispute me as the Pope of the true faith. I know, but it is an outrage that such fanatics could slip in and strike here. As the interviewing officer's expression became even more pained, Zoshan began to realize who was sitting 6 feet away from him. The bodyguard, Sancta, laid a hand on the robed man's arm. Your Holiness, I don't think that we should take up the ministry's time with this. They're very busy with more serious criminals and heretics. After all, those two Jamalites won't bother anyone else again. Zoshan shook his head in bemusement and noticed from the corner of his eye that Inquisitor Sarkovas' visitor was leaving. He stood up and walked over to the chief investigator's office. Sarkovas was waiting for him at the door and clasped his hand. Ramal! It's good to see you up and about. No lasting damage, I hope. This way. Come. Sit. I'm quite well, Chief, and I managed to look into the matter some more while I was recovering. Oh? Inquisitor Sarkovas frowned. Commendable, yes, commendable. But you had a near escape with that incident in Valset Sarum Square. You're a fine investigator, Zoshan, but the mind and body has limits. Yes, Chief, I'll remember that. Zoshan hesitated and gestured back at the bullpen. Chief, I couldn't help but notice that there's a capsuleer of questionable reputation being interviewed as a witness out there. Inquisitor Sarkovas nodded slowly. The heretic Max Singularity and his hired killer, Sancta Basilica. I find his presence as distasteful as you do, but there are political realities to consider. Not only are they both capsuleers, which limits us in its own way, but this so-called Pope was a candidate champion in the House Cador bouts of the succession trials. He is, let us say, protected from on high. I see. Well, ours is to serve, Chief. Indeed. And frankly, when it comes to possible heresy, I'm more concerned with Jamalite extremists. This new Tarot of St. Jamil have been showing up everywhere. Sarkovas paused and shook his head. In any event, you were saying that you had some information as to the bombing? The assassination of 2 diplomatic envoys during Coronation Week had raised many questions. The powers that be are not pleased. Any light you can shed on this matter will be useful, even if you should have been resting. Sarkovas smiled. I'm not sure I can shed light on it, Chief. I have more questions after looking into it than I do now. Let's have it then. Perhaps we can puzzle it out together. Zoshan ordered his thoughts. Well, there are several things that don't add up. For one thing, every monitoring device in the Amitat and Avatat bar had been disabled or suborned. Our own devices started to transmit white noise a few minutes before the Lidai envoy entered the premises. Sarkovas consulted his screen. That would be this Sata Motion, a member of the Lidai trade delegation. Zoshan nodded. Yes, he met with the Thucker, a member of Shakur's delegation called Tamasek Sakuni. We got nothing from their meeting. They use a sound dampening field and seem to have disabled any and all monitors. I checked my datapad's video files. The Thucker was using a localized visual field scrambler to disguise his lip movements. Sarkovus raised his eyebrows. Curious. It's understandable that diplomats would take care. The sound dampening field was to be expected. However, these other measures speak of a more covert tradecraft than simple diplomatic caution. The red flags don't end there. Tamasek Sakuni isn't just a Thucker diplomat. From what I've been able to glean, he's a trusted figure within the YellowCladKing caravan ruling council, and there are indications of links to the Sisters of Eve, as well as his clear connection with Shakur's circle. And, well, Zoshan hesitated, then pressed on. He's not dead. I beg your pardon? Sakuni's not dead. He was with Shakur's delegation when they left the system after Shathal Sin. It looks like he joined their convoy in high orbit from the transfer station. So he backed up. Nothing too unusual about that, particularly if he's so high-ranking. Although, if he joined them in orbit... Sarkovus looked thoughtful. Then he had a backup ready in system, and it was set as his primary. He knew. That's my assumption. Be careful about assumptions in this business, Zoshan. That said, if he was party to the bombing, then it changes matters. That means it's an assassination of an allied diplomat with the involvement of the Republic. Would Shakur be that brazen? Allowing his attendance at his coronation to serve as cover for political murder? Sarkovus thought a moment, and then shook his head. But that's absurd. The other party was a minor diplomat at best, a trade envoy for Lidai. What benefit in killing someone like that here and now? It could be done elsewhere, at another time. Why take such a risk? Zoshan nodded eagerly and leaned forward. I don't have the answer, Chief, but there's something very wrong when it comes to the Lidai man. Ah, so now we come to it. A cover of some kind? It looks that way. I've checked into the Caldari state records, those they share with us. This Satamochin leaves a very rarefied trace. Yes, there's a record of a Lidai trade envoy of that name, and it does seem like he was born as a space adept, as indicated by the diplomatic credentials. The records say that he's a Lidai citizen, born on one of their Opio systems installations. That's out in Lone Trek, Chief. Inquisitor Sarkovus nodded and smiled faintly. Yes, I'm acquainted with the Caldari state's geography. Yes, sir. Sorry, sir. Well, the rest is basic corporate bio. Some details of his education, work postings, and it all ends up with him turning up as a trade envoy visiting Satras City during Coronation Week, specifically arriving only the day before Shathal Sin. There's precious little else, and it smells like a cover identity to me. There's one more thing. Something odd. What's that? Sarkovus asked. Well, Mochin didn't arrive in system by ship. He clone jumped. He was supposedly at one of the Lidai Tamo stations an hour earlier and arrived at a cloning facility in the Emperor's family station. We have him walking out of the facility shortly after the jump took place. The clone bay that was used was leased to the Lidai Protection Services, and the facility is operated by, let's see, here we are, Genelution Corporation. Sarkovus raised his eyebrows a moment and ruminated on this information. No, he said slowly. No, this won't do. Someone has made a mistake, I think. Haste, perhaps. But this doesn't hang together. The chief investigator drummed his fingers on his desk, gave Zoshan a penetrating look, and made a decision. I'm going to involve you in a matter of state, Zoshan. You may not thank me for it, but I believe that you're reliable and capable. The younger man was taken aback. You think this means something serious, Chief? Potentially. Sit there a moment. I have to consult an old friend. The chief investigator activated his office conference screen and tapped out a code. The screen sprang to life, momentarily displayed some liquid router connection data, and then showed a female Arctura dressed in formal Caldari administrator-level business wear. House of Records. On its Sero Central Registry, how may I serve you? Connect me with Havo Tagmatsu, Archive K. The Arctura's expression instantly became guarded. Your authorization? The chief glanced at Zoshan and then replied, Sadar Colonel Powervas Sarkovus, Amar Naval Intelligence. Archive K designation, Cardplayer. Please transmit your identification package. Sarkovus tapped a code out and waited. Identity confirmed. Connecting you, Cardplayer. Sarkovus looked at Zoshan again while the screen displayed a connection transfer ident and smiling faintly gave a small shrug. Zoshan caught himself gaping and sat back, thunderstruck at this turn of events. The screen flickered momentarily, and the new connection displayed a slim, dark-haired, though graying at the temples, Detis. The man was dressed in standard Caldari executive wear, and sat behind a polished dark wood desk, with a shelf of books and holotapes covering the wall behind him. "Parvis Sarkovis," said Havo Tagamitsu. "It's been a long time. I hear you fell on hard times after." Tagamitsu's eye flickered to Zoshan as he paused. "Well, after the business with the historians. It was necessary to find another posting, yes. You know how it is. At an MIO field office in a fairly quiet region of Amar Prime? Exile, then? They took it that hard?" Sarkovis smiled wryly, glanced at Zoshan, and waved his hand airily. "The food is rather good out here, and they do a marvelous goat curry. You should try it sometime." Tajimitsu laughed. "At least you haven't lost your sense of humor, old man. So, I take it you're still in the game if you're calling me. Or what? This isn't MIO business, is it? I owe you, but helping you catch some poor guy who likes ground walnuts in his chicken stew or something isn't my line. Call it Amar Empire business, and no, this isn't a heretic hunt or anything of that kind. We turn over all sorts of rocks in the ministry." "Okay, what have you turned up? I'm guessing it's some kind of megacorp connection? I'm still not exactly an expert on Amar politics, you know." "Given you're now the Archive K section head for the Amar Caldari Diplomatic Intelligence, I suspect you undersell yourself, Havo. But you're right. I need to know about the Lidai diplomat who was recently killed here in Shashath City." Sarkovis glanced at the watching Zoshan and raised an eyebrow. Tajimitsu became thoughtful, tapped his fingers on the desk for a moment or two, then nodded. "Mochin, the Lidai trade envoy. Well, as you're talking to me, I suppose his cover fell apart when you looked at him too? Not one of your own, then?" "No. The asset didn't belong to any state or megacorp agency as far as I could tell. Cover seems to have been put together in a hurry. Or rather, it's an old one, quite well established, but not intended for the end user that picked it up. There are some anomalies involving movement in the asset, too." "Routing data. That's the favor I need. This Mochin used a clone bay to jump into the Amar Emperor's family station. It's operated by Genelution, but leased to the Lidai Protection Services. Our records indicate that the origin point was Tamo. I'd like to know if that's true. Possibly they weren't so thorough at your end." Quite a few Lidai stations in Tamo, not to mention ground facilities. Which one?" Sarkovis looked at Zoshan. Let's see. According to this, it was Tamo 5, Lidai Station," said Zoshan. "Right. A big one. Lots of clone traffic through there. Let's see. Yeah, see, here's the problem. Mochin wasn't on the station initially. They had to move the asset from a position at an advanced ship fabrication facility. To my mind, we're looking at a cover swap here. Mochin's primary mission was probably monitoring Lidai's ship development while masquerading as trade envoy to get around. Kind of a thing any number of interests would get up to. It would be odd to move such an asset at short notice to meet here during Coronation Week. That would support your notion of a cover swap. If the swap happened properly, Mochin gets on the shuttle from the ship fab to 5-5, then heads for a Genelution-operated cloning facility. Genelution? Not Lidai's own on that station? No, this is the wrinkle. The guy used a short-notice, public clone bay to jump. Mochin has a backup in blank on 5-5, but it's the Lidai cloning facilities. We're working on getting a hold of it, but it'll be a decoy. He must have had a full backup somewhere else, but that ship fab doesn't have a single clone bay. Hence the shuttle to 5-5. Very curious. It gets better. No scan was made, at his explicit instruction. Waiver signed and all, they synced the clone jump with an off-site backup routed to the destination, but he burned some time when he clone jumped, and he did clone jump. We seized the used blank when it all fell apart after the bombing. Everything else was crypto-shredded. This stuff has been legal in the state since clone jumping became available to the executive classes. Makes for some really degenerate shit, I can tell you. Yes, well, we all have our problems. But it makes sense. They knew this was rushed. Too much risk of something going wrong to have a clone jump scan record left in a public clone bay. Someone using the Mochin cover clone jumps, but burns time while they're at it. That makes them useless unless they get briefed. Or it doesn't matter if they don't need to be briefed. If it's just a cover handoff, very rough and very dirty, someone really needed a fresh cover in a hurry, and could call on an asset willing to burn time to deliver it. They have some dedicated people, not that it narrows the field any. I'm backtracking Mochin now, and he'd spent a lot of time in space recently, shuttling between different ship fab facilities. None of them had cloning setups, probably burned a month experimental. If he was a merc, the money must have been good. You burn that much time in infomorph psychosis is a real risk. This is a network. We're not dealing with contractors here. This is someone with an agenda, and people who believe in it. But they're short-handed or spread very, very thinly. Something unexpected made them burn a useful asset just to make a meeting. If there's any more light to be shed about this, it's at your end, Parvaz. I'll run down what more I can on this Mochin cover, but I don't think the same person turned up in your bombing. I'll keep you in the loop, Havo. My thanks. Next time, not so long, eh? Was good seeing you again. The conference screen flicked to a connection ident momentarily, then shut down. Parvis Sokovis sat back and steepled his fingers, lost in thought. Zoshan waited quietly, still working with the implications of everything he'd witnessed. What had seemed like some kind of terrorist bombing during Coronation Week had quickly assumed the proportions of a cluster-wide conspiracy. Not to mention Chief Inquisitor Sarkovis now appeared in a strange new light. Ramal, I'm going to have to ask you to go into the field on my behalf. My circumstances are such that I cannot leave here. Still paying for old sins, unfortunately. But we've uncovered something here that could threaten the Empire's interest, and it's our job to dig further. I'll do what I can from here, investigate the Mochin angle further, and keep in touch with Taigamitsu. But you'll have to pursue the Sakuni lead. I have a feeling that one will turn up again somewhere. When he does, I want you to be there. I'll put you in touch with another old friend. Quite a powerful old friend. Whatever you order, Chief, we'll get to the bottom of this. Sarkovis sat back and smiled wryly. Perhaps we will, Ramal. Perhaps we will. Some personal recollections. Uli System, Uli 9. Secure DED Comms Bunker, Core YP9, Helical, YC118, 10, 14. For my purposes, the problem of CONCORD's existence goes deeper than it simply existing as a talking shop at which these self-important empires air these grievances. No, the problem is it was a mistake, a grave mistake. Those who counseled caution and delay created a vast apparatus dedicated to inertia and the slowing of humanity's inevitable but necessary development. Now they're all gone, except for a few annoying holdouts, and those of us with real vision are faced with this bureaucratic monstrosity. Still, all obstacles are opportunities, as the old saying goes. By the time the so-called Interstellar Technology Audit and Inspection Office called its little meeting, it was far too late. The cloning technologies were all in place, and Yoon had prepared a strategy in conjunction with the colleagues in the state. When Inspector General revealed that the Amar and Galente had the new cloning technology, Yoon and his Caldari friends simply disclosed that they had it too. In essence, sharing of the new technology had already taken place, and nothing was going to stop its development and release. A quite beautiful fait accompli. The agreed communique placed the blame on the sisters, but it all sounded like nothing more than a slap on the wrist. Of course, the real punishment was far more than that. Everyone who mattered was at the inner circle meeting. Shakur just made Yoon his man on the circle, which only went to confirm how far the man had risen in Shakur's power structure. Devin Malatate was there for the Galente, Black's man to my certain knowledge. Serdan Zerkosh for the Amar. Superfluously a ranting buffoon, but probably the most dangerous man in the circle. Except for Reich, of course. I wouldn't mind the society being in the Jove's old place, but the problem with them was the continuing influence of the party of delay. As for the state, well, after the debacle with Heth, they insisted on rotating their membership among the big 8 megacorps. This time, Kunakainen Onita from Sukavesta was present. The meeting may have been secret, but this one had a number of others in attendance. Yoon had brought me along, nominally as our Thucker representative and a Republic fleet officer. Everyone else had brought various military officials with them. Amusingly, the Amar even had one of their heretic hunters from the Ministry of Order with them. That one looked vaguely familiar. Perhaps one of their more notorious witch-burners. Their religion may be ridiculous, but I can appreciate it as a tool for social engineering and political control. And then, of course, there were the sisters. They sent Harna Dorato, along with an old friend, Sister Latimus, in tow. Latimus looked like she'd drunk 5 cups of fresh tea. I rather thought it was a pity she hadn't given her usefulness was at an end. Perhaps I had a premonition as to the trouble she would cause me. Sari Okanaya was furious, of course. The Inner Circle president is good at hiding her feelings, but that one gets colder and colder the angrier she is. The AG-12 Inspector General was sat with her and looked like he wanted to escape the icy surface rather than deal with Okanaya's vast fordor. Dorado sat stony-faced through the ticking off part of it all. No doubt she was as bored of it as I was. The important part started when Reich spoke up. Thank you for your introductory remarks, President Okanaya. I am sure all of us here understand the gravity of unauthorized sharing of technology of this kind. While we cannot act precipitously, I am afraid that it is the view of the Society of Conscious Thought that this tremendous scientific research potential for Project Discovery cannot be left in the hands of a single entity, such as the Sisters of Eve. As you are aware, the maximum potential of Project Discovery takes advantage of the liquid router backbone that the SCC maintains for purposes of interstellar communication and commerce. Without this core service, Project Discovery could not operate at its present level. By way of sanctioning for the sharing of findings, made in part for the data analysis performed in Project Discovery, the Inner Circle could of course direct the SCC to prohibit use of the liquid router backbone for such purposes. However, that's not the Society's proposal. Rather, we suggest that oversight of Project Discovery be transferred to CONCORD at an appropriate time. This will allow the sisters to conclude their present research efforts and allow the interstellar community to continue to benefit from Project Discovery's potential. Latimus gasped at this and shook her head. Dorado darted her a sharp glance of rebuke, and foolish Latimus lowered her head. You propose giving us sufficient time to complete our work on drifter tissue analysis, then? Asked Dorado. Yes. I would suggest a period of 6 to 9 months would be sufficient. We'll at least delay announcement of this handover for some time. I see no point in tainting Project Discovery by connecting this matter so explicitly with this unfortunate affair. Naturally, the Cognizant will put the pieces together when we eventually announce this agreement. Naturally, said Dorado. Agreement. You are remarkably cavalier with that word, Resch. But we will acquiesce to this, as you have suggested. We have little choice. Reich's solution was a clever one. Had the sisters been backed into a corner right away, they might have gone public and attempted to attract the sympathy of the public and even the capsuleers. Giving them the space to finish their tissue analysis had taken the air out of that entirely. Latimus still seemed to be horrified by the turn of events, and I made a note that she really would have to be dealt with. Some personal recollections. July 3, Concord City outskirts, YC119, 1229. Tracking down Latimus took far longer than I would have liked in the end. Wisely, she remained within the protection of the sanctuary, while the sisters still controlled Project Discovery. Had she remained under their umbrella, getting at her and replacing her would have been a complicated matter. Latimus had caused further difficulties with her damned Project Discovery memorial, but it seems that she couldn't let things rest there. My patience was rewarded when she bolted from cover and led me to an entirely unexpected encounter. The small settlements on the outskirts of Concord City had been set up to take advantage of the local geothermal vents. It was simply a series of dwellings and technical shops supporting the many geothermal power arrays scattered around the area east of Concord City. At the very edge of the settlement, near the closest of the power arrays, there was a small 2-level hab. A few minutes before, Latimus had entered it. I had a couple of Onekori's thugs with me. As far as I was concerned, this was all part of the planned strike against Concord. I certainly wasn't going to tell them more than I had told Onekori. He and his group has proved useful in the last few years, even if our largest operation to date hadn't yielded optimal results. Onekori had insisted on carrying on with Darkness Visible even after the failure of Offspring Cephas. I allowed it, but suggested a more symbolic date before the strike. Our camera drones had detected nothing in the way of defenses or threats to us, so we approached the dwelling rather straightforwardly after jamming all communications and fooling the rather simple surveillance devices attached to the hab. Thermal imaging indicated the presence of Latimus and one other female at the top floor of the dwelling. One of my accomplices circled around the rear entry of the hab, and I and the other paused on the front entry while the rear was secured. Entry was simplicity itself. Onekori's man was well practiced in the art of electronic lockpicking. The pair of us met the other at the foot of the stairwell leading up to the upper floor. "Stay here. Make sure we aren't disturbed," I said to the second man. I looked at the man I'd entered with. "Let's go and introduce ourselves to the ladies upstairs, shall we?" To say that Latimus was surprised would be an understatement. She actually collapsed in fright. I was a little disappointed, but she'd definitely seen my face, so that was something. The other person was a real find, though. "Sister Taya Akira. Well, well, well. What a pleasure it is to make your acquaintance at last. You don't know me, but I, to be sure, know you." "Who the hell are you? Get out before I call the police," said Sister Taya. She was clearly terrified, but I give her credit for holding up under the shock better than the absurd Latimus. "Come now, you know that things have gone beyond the law being your ally, my dear. Best you come with us, but before that, let's deal with Latimus." I motioned to Anakori's man. "Remove that trash." When Anakori's man drew his plasma pistol and reduced Latimus to a char in one smooth motion, several things happened. The first was that Taya Akira screamed, turned, and stepped through the window, which made me smile as I knew it didn't open, and it was made of a thin layer of cheap but very tough crystalline carbine. The second thing that happened was that my own camera drone network alerted me to a rapidly approaching threat profile, and I threw myself back out of the room and into what little cover I could find. The third was that both my companions shouted, "Incoming!" as their rather less sophisticated camera drones were entirely neutralized by the new threat. By this time I had activated my trump card, combination personal shield and cloaking device. What happened next astounded me, and is a matter for ongoing concern for all of us involved in the Ascension project. As far as my surviving camera drones could make out through the haze of electromagnetic jamming and information warfare, a drone the size of an atmospheric fighter craft took up a hovering position in front of the window into the room that I had just been in. Then it burned out a window frame, reduced my erstwhile accomplice to a pile of ash with a quick burst of lasers, and grabbed Taya Akira with as much tenderness as possible for a rogue drone. Ah yes, this was definitely a rogue drone of some kind. Then it apparently scanned the hab, decided to burn Anakori's surviving man to a crisp through 2 intervening walls, and accelerated away with Akira in its grasp. Clearly, it hadn't seen through my cloak. One of the only good things to be said about all that is that at least I didn't have to use up another clone and piece together the whole day's events using data recordings. The other matter was that the drone apparently didn't care about Akira's own data. I quickly extracted it and retreated from the habitat before the authorities arrived. Events had not gone unnoticed by the locals, and it was only a matter of time before a DD team arrived on site. Later, after analyzing Akira's database, I had to have another tiresome conversation with Anakori. Typically, he wasn't all that concerned about losses of his men. What he didn't like was that the data I extracted suggested darkness visible had been compromised. Given the data, he saw sense in delaying the operation until further upgrades could be carried out, and he even rather liked my suggestion for an equally symbolic target date and place. The most vexing thing of all was that Latimus had a backup. That was news to me. The Sanctuary had evidently persuaded her to go out on a mission for them by providing the insurance. I had to put the clone jack I'd prepared back on ice. There'd be other opportunities sooner or later. Ulai System. Ulai 8, Inner Circle Tribunal Station, Amar Embassy, YC-120, 04-14. Captain Marshal Serdan Zerkosh and Sub-Inquisitor Ramal Zoshan watched as the display showed a shuttle on approach to what seemed to be the control nexus of a large structure in orbit of a temperate planet. They had watched earlier as a small flight of covert operation frigates had intercepted and scanned the massive, monolithic object. Now a shuttle piloted by one of DD's covert contractors was taking Sorrow troops to board and neutralize the threat posed by the object. They continued to watch as the shuttle nudged into position alongside the entry point, and then disgorged a squadron of fully armed Sorrow assault troopers. The shuttle held position as accompanying covert ops frigates, also flown by DD contractors, took up stations in support of the vulnerable transport. After 5 minutes or so that seemed to stretch into hours for Ramal Zoshan, the all-clear signal was given, and the shuttle went back to base to pick up the specialists waiting to subject this captured object to forensic scrutiny. Well, that's that. The intel you received from your sister's contact was accurate. I'd like to know how they got a hold of it, though. Something about this doesn't add up. What was that thing? Zoshan hadn't fully understood the purpose of the large device the Sorrow troops had captured. A very old, very dangerous, and very simple idea. It's called a black hammer. Well, that's what we call ours. The other empires have equally colorful names for their own versions. The pointy heads in weapons research would call it a covert approach planetary scale kinetic impactor. Marshal Zerkosh glanced at Zoshan and saw that he hadn't resolved the other's confusion. It's a planet killer. Well, not on its own, and it doesn't really kill planets. But drop a few of those on a temperate planet, and you can be confident of wrecking the global ecosystem and killing an awful lot of people. That's horrific! Yes, and what's worse, in principle, they're not difficult to make. It's a big chunk of tungsten with a few ion impellers stuck on the back. The main problem is to make them undetectable to space defense nets, near-asteroid search and destroy, and planetary interception batteries. That takes some skill and technology. It's not just a matter of painting them black anymore. Gravity wake detection is a fine scale enough these days. You need equipment that can compensate locally and fool gravitational detection systems. Make it look like nothing bigger than a meteorite that'll burn up, or at best, kill a cow in a field somewhere. That sounds like very advanced technology. Could it be the Drifters, or perhaps the Triglavians? As to the Drifters or Triglavians doing this, I doubt it. See here on this data feed, it's clear the thing was fully equipped with up-to-date tech, but this is all Caldari gravitation-based equipment, which means it could be anyone able to support the gravitech on the Caldari black market. No. Someone else came very close to dropping this thing on a target somewhere in Uli 3. I'd say Concord City was the target. Drop it in sea close by, and no amount of shielding would stop the shockwave and tsunami coming in like a matched pair of scythes. A nice little strike against Concord for someone. Who would have planned such a thing? Who would do this? Was Concord City really the target? That thing's overkill as a bunker buster, though it'd certainly do the job. No. Anyone capable of putting this together could set up a strike on a specific facility with something less attention-grabbing than this. This was meant for a large target, and was meant to send a message. And Concord City is more than just the biggest city on the planet. It's the hub for Concord's planetary operations and system. The Secure Commerce Commission alone has a trading communication center and archive occupying the entire arcology down there. Perhaps someone was trying to knock the SEC network offline? No chance of that. Too many redundancies in the network. Might have taken out some records and spoiled some deals. No. I have a feeling the real target was on the other side of the bay. The Society of Conscious Thought diplomatic facility hosting their annual Capsuleer gathering. Much as I find the meddling of Capsuleers in affairs that don't concern them an affront to all concepts of order, the annihilation of such a gathering would have been, well, unfortunate. Mind you, had this thing dropped, the casualties would have run into millions in total. And we stopped this from happening? Surely Concord will surely be grateful to the Empire for our role in this. Captain Marshal Zerkosh grunted and looked sideways at Ramal Zoshan before sticking out a hand for the other to grasp. You've been promoted to Inquisitor, Zoshan. Congratulations. I had not heard that. You're hearing it from me. You've also been transferred to the diplomatic branch, seconded to my staff. You can shake my hand now. But my post Investidor? Said Zoshan as he limply shook the Marshal's hand. Your work over there has been over for some time now. In the last 18 months, you've become aware of a great many things concerning matters that are of no concern to a regional investigator. There are two alternatives open to us. Given how highly Colonel Sarkovas speaks of you, I'm exercising my discretion and offering you the least wasteful of those alternatives. The interests of the throne and empire are paramount beyond our lives, Zoshan. I suggest that you don't think too deeply about it and reconcile yourself with your new life. The work will often be vexing. At first I will expect it to shock you, but it is vital work, however unpalatable it may be. I hear and obey, Captain Marshal. Quite so. Zoshan looked back at the screen in the freeze frame that showed just a portion of the Black Hammer's massive bulk and ventured a final question. Captain Marshal, the people who tried to do this, they must be capable of almost any horror. If we don't neutralize them, well, what might they try next? Captain Marshal Serdan Zerkosh looked at Zoshan a moment. He shook his head slightly, grimacing. Anything, Zoshan. Absolutely anything. And what you should realize is that these are the kind of people who are already doing it. Whatever it is. A personal note to an old friend. Genesis region, Uli system, YC-120-04-14. I suppose I should congratulate you and your friends on thwarting our latest little endeavor. Oh, don't worry about me. I will recover from the blow. It wasn't that important in the grand scheme of things. Ironically, you've deprived your Concord pets of a courtesy I felt obliged to do them. Call it a warning. You see, this plan was merely an infinitesimal in a greater integral. The lack of one moment of foreshadowing will not alter the inevitable future. After this, I imagine you'll see that your protege and others are suitably altered to the good. It's important that people are aware they're being taught a lesson. As for you, my old friend, I wonder, did you really believe the War of a Million Lives was over? Sakuni.